Hello, today we're going to be looking at density and how density works. We're going to be building a 5-layer traffic light made of liquid in a jar, and then we're going to drop some things into that jar and see how dense they are. Now, you may not have heard of density before, but you may have put ice into a glass and wondered why it floats. I mean, ice is water. You've got water in the glass. Why is the ice floating on the water? Well, it's because the ice is less dense. And that is how an iceberg can float. An iceberg can weigh 1,000,000 tons, like the one that we'll show you now. So that iceberg you saw could weigh 1,000,000 tons, but it can still float in the sea because the ice is less dense. Now, what density is it's the relationship of mass to the amount of space that an object takes up. So if something is small but really heavy, like a fishing weight or a piece of metal, then we would say it's more dense. If it's like a block of foam or a pool noodle or something like that, it takes up more space and it doesn't weigh much, so we would say that it's less dense. Sometimes people will use the word dense to describe someone who's maybe not so smart, but technically what that means is the person is heavy and compact. So remember that next time someone calls you that. Now, there are a few things you'll need in order to do this today, and we've got them all here. So what you'll need is a jug of water, some vegetable oil, some dishwashing liquid, some honey. Now, I wouldn't use your expensive Manuka honey here because you're not going to be able to eat it afterwards. You won't be able to put this one on toast when we're finished with it. And this, which is glucose syrup, which is kind of unusual. It's really thick and goopy, and you can get this in the supermarket. Now, if you don't have all of these, that's totally fine. You can just do it with oil and water and dishwashing liquid if that's all you have, if you don't want to waste your honey. Otherwise, you can pick and choose among them and you'll still be able to do it to some level. We also need some food coloring, which we have here, and we'll need 3 plastic cups like this, or glasses if you have them at home. I've already put some of the things into cups here. I've got some cooking oil in this cup, and I've put the glucose in here, and I've mixed it with some green food coloring. You can see how thick it is, it won't even tip out. Some green food coloring so that it's easy to see. Finally, you'll need a tall plastic jar like this one to put your substances in, and you'll need a few little things to drop in to test the density at the end. I've got a Lego man, a piece of cork, a little dinosaur, a heavy bolt, some blue tack, bottle caps, and a paper clip, but you can use whatever you like. Okay, so we've got everything we need, and now we can get started. So the first thing you're going to want to put in is the glucose. Now, the glucose is pretty sticky and heavy, so you'll need a spoon to get it out. So if you want to come in closer, you'll see as I start to spoon out glucose, it's like super thick slime. Whatever you do, don't get it on yourself. It's really hard to get off. It will come off eventually, but it's so goopy and thick. You can see it's quite hard. Now we want to try and get it in without it getting all over the inside sides of the jar. So I'm getting it in there, and you can see it going down in a single little trail like that, trying not to get too much on the sides of the jar so that we just get that nice layer of green down the bottom. So now we can scoop up that and put that to one side. Now, the order we need to do this in is quite important. So we'll start with the glucose and then we'll move on to the honey. We don't want to get them all mixed up. So we start glucose, then honey. Now, luckily this honey's in a squeezy bottle, so it makes it nice and easy. So we can take the top open, put this over here, and again, we'll gently, slowly squeeze it out, and we'll make sure that we don't get honey all down the sides of the jar because it'll start to mix up. So I'm going to put a bit of honey in there because we want to see the difference between the two. And as it's rising up, you see the honey isn't mixing with the glucose. The glucose is more dense than the honey, and it's sitting down the bottom. So the honey will form a nice golden layer right on top of the glucose. And we'll make it a nice thick one so we can really see the difference. So it's sort of starting to look a little bit like a traffic light already, although we're going to put a blue one in there, and I haven't seen a traffic light with a blue light on it before. So you can see we've got 2 nice layers between our honey and our glucose. The next thing we're going to put in is some dish liquid, and this one is a really cool bright blue color. So we do the same thing from the top there, nice and slow, don't go too fast, and just get that in there so that I've gone a little bit too fast. I'll slow it right down. As you can see, the dish liquid was actually starting to get into the honey because I'm going too fast. So I'm going to be gentle and slow, and you can see it's forming a nice, pretty cool looking blue layer. It's looking really different than the other ones. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool. You can see how distinct the layers are. They're very, very separate as they're different density of liquids. So now we'll put the water in. Now we want the water to look a bit cool, you know, we want it to look kind of interesting so it stands out. So I'll put a little bit of red food coloring. Just a few drops will do. I've put 3 or 4 drops in there. And we'll mix our water in so that we get something that looks like raspberry cordial. Now with the water we have to pour it in really carefully and slowly because we don't want it to mix in with the dishwashing liquid and make a big mess. It's okay if the water goes on the edge of the glass jar like that. And nice and slow we pour it in and just keep pouring it. You can see if I go too fast it starts to mix in a little bit with the dish liquid. So we need to go nice and slow. And that should be enough to start with there. And you can see we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 separate layers. We'll do our final layer now with cooking oil. Now with the cooking oil it's the same thing. It doesn't matter so much if it gets on the side of the jar. We can just pour it in slowly and you can see it's starting to form its own layer. You've probably heard the phrase from people that oil and water don't mix. It's a pretty common phrase. And you can see that happening here. You can see that the oil is forming its own layer on the top. And we'll stop it there because we're going to need a little bit of space at the top because if we drop things in there, we'll displace the liquid and it'll go everywhere. So now you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate layers and they're all sticking to their own because each one is of a different density. From the top we have a lower density all the way down to the heaviest, most dense liquid, which is the glucose that we put in at the start. Now we'll start dropping things in and we'll see how they go. Okay, so we've got all our objects here ready to test their density, and I reckon first up let's send our dinosaur for a swim. All right, so our dinosaur sunk all the way down to the honey layer. So the dinosaur's actually pretty dense. He's sort of floating in the honey there. So he's not as dense as the honey, and he's nowhere near as dense as the glucose, but he's denser than the dishwashing liquid. So he must have quite a lot of little mass in his little frame there. Interestingly, that's actually how we found lots of dinosaur fossils and remains from animals from the time of dinosaurs. They've fallen into pits full of tar and things like that, gotten stuck and floated in there, and then millions of years later we found them. But let's try some of our other things. We've got a little bolt here. So, you know, metal's usually pretty heavy, right? So let's see how that one goes. We'll throw that one in. Oh, that one's much more dense. It's gone all the way down to the glucose, and it's going through the glucose all the way down to the bottom. So the metal's definitely more dense than any of our liquids, cooking oil or anything. What about a blue tack ball? Let's see how this goes. Oh, the blue tack ball is sinking through the honey very slowly, so it might not go through the glucose. So the blue tack ball, it's pretty dense, but not as dense as the bolt, which we saw went all the way through. Now if we throw one of these in, a bottle cap, I'll drop it in the top. I'll make sure it gets a bit of oil in it. The bottle cap only sinks into the oil, and we can see from the top there It's denser than the oil, but it's not as dense as the water. So it floats on the top of water. If we drop a cork in, well, what do we think is going to happen here? A cork, you know, it's pretty light. We drop that in, and of course, it floats on top of everything because it's not very dense at all. If we drop a Lego man in, about the same density as our bottle cap. You can see the Lego man just sort of floating on the top here. He's not even sinking into the water. And a final one is we've got a paper clip. We'll see how that goes. I'll turn around to the side so you can see, and we'll drop that paper clip in. Oh, it's sinking down to the honey. Oh, yep, going down further. So it's pretty dense. It is slowing down though a little bit, so probably not as dense as our bolt, which sunk all the way to the bottom. So anything you could find around the house that you can drop into here safely, you could do to see how dense it is. Also, if you wanted to make another one of these, you could put the lid on top of the jar and keep it in your room if you like the way the colors are. You could even shine a torch through it and see how the light goes with all the different colors. When you're done though, make sure to dispose of it carefully, because if you spill this on the carpet or on your clothes, it's going to be really hard to get out. Anyway, I hope you guys have had fun, and we'll see you again for our next workshop.